What's up, everybody? We are back with everybody's favorite video that I do right before a set releases, talking about what we're looking at for pre-release cards. And if you open your packs, maybe you want to play those, maybe it steers you a certain direction towards a type of deck. So before we start diving into cards, there is always something that I want to touch on, and I just want to have a quick kind of rundown for everybody. So going into the pre-release, what are some things that you may want to bring and to make sure that you're covered, so you're not looking for items when you get there and you're settled in, you're just worried about playing and building your deck, and that's it. So first off, we're looking at snacks. Bring your own snacks if you want. Secondly, that would be dice. So using dice basically as any sort of counters in Edge of Eternities from Magic the Gathering. We have a lot of things to track. +1/+1 counters. There's poison counters for one creature for whatever reason. Tracking a massive amount of tokens, and the new thing, tracking, well, charge counters aren't new, but charge counters on your spacecrafts. So bring dice. Third, we kind of talked about it with snacks. Bring drinks. Then next up, bring sleeves. I know there are some players that just don't care and will just play without sleeves, but I can't do that. If I pull a cool card and I really want to play it, yeah, I'm not gonna just raw dog that card in a shuffle. That's not gonna work. And then finally, another thing that I do, but not particularly everybody else, is because there's some tokens that you may or may not pull out of your packs, bring blank token cards. The token cards that were just basically a nice little border and a white space on it. I put those in a penny sleeve, and I bring a dry erase marker or pieces of paper if you want. Just throw them away. So now let's go to tips that I have for you. So very basic things. The minimum amount of cards that you can have in your deck is 40. 40 cards is the minimum, but you could, every single card that you pull out of the pre-release, you could just go and play in your deck and play 5-color everything stuff. But I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend right around 40. I'm usually sitting about 42. So 40 cards. What does that mean? Well, that means that you're going to want, out of those 40 cards, 17-ish lands. Usually people will float like 17, 16. Some people will even go 15 if they feel like they can make it work and they have the land fixing for it. But I'm usually sitting about 16 lands myself, but 17 is a good starting point if you've never done a pre-release before. So that means you're looking at about 23 other cards if you're sitting right at that 40 card mark that we just talked about. And then finally, something that I think new players don't really get, and even some more seasoned players don't end up doing enough of. Removal is king in most formats, and after seeing a couple people pull cards and play with these cards, I can tell you, yeah, removal is still definitely king. So make sure you have enough removal. What is enough removal? Maybe 6 cards worth of removal in there could be good. So that's all kind of personal preference, but I would probably do about 5 or 6 cards if you really want it up. That is it for the tips that I have for you guys. And next up is the tricks or the mechanics, really. So what are the new mechanics that we have within Edge of Eternities? The land set, right? Well, the first one I want to talk about is Void. So Void has a trigger at a certain area of your turn, whether it is the end step at the very end of your turn, if it's maybe a creature attacks. There's even Void when cards enter play, if I remember right. And it'll read on the card, hey, at the beginning of your end step. And then the next thing is the same across all those cards. If a non-land permanent left the battlefield or a card was warped, which we'll talk about warp next, then something happens. So make sure you read the card really well, because it'll explain exactly when that happens and exactly what you get. But the thing that is the same across the board is non-land permanent has to leave the battlefield or you warp a card. And that's really the gist of Void. Warp. What is warp? Warp is just basically you're paying a cheaper cost for a card, and the card comes into the battlefield and you get to use it, and you can't really attack with it or use a tap ability on it unless it has haste, which there's some ways to do it in this set. And you get that card until your end step, then it gets exiled, and then you can cast it for its regular cost in the top right corner whenever you want from the exile pile. So it's kind of like a way to get double value on your cards. Now, something that I also want to mention is when you cast it for that regular cost, the cost in the top right corner, and it comes into the battlefield, if it dies, it's not exiled. It goes back to your graveyard. So the cool thing about that now is if you can get it back to your hand, you can cast it for the warp cost again. And you can only warp when the card's in your hand. Just for clarification on that. So warp does a couple things, right? It triggers Void, like we talked about, because if a card is warped, you get the Void payoff. But also, warp is a interesting thing with our next mechanic, Station. And that comes on lands, which are called planets, and that comes on spacecrafts, which are kind of like vehicles. So artifacts that enter the battlefield that can become creatures. And the station cards basically read off that you can tap a creature and put on the spacecraft card charge counters equal to the power of the creature that you just tapped. So in the instance of warped, yes, it may have an ability on it like when a creature enters the battlefield you gain 1 life. You might want to play it for the warp cost on a certain turn so you can get double bonus out of the ability, maybe gain a couple life, like I said in the example. But you can also use the spacecraft and the station ability to tap that warped creature, even though it has summoning sickness. You can tap that creature because it's the station ability that's doing it, not the creature itself. Use its power to put charge counters on to your spacecraft or your planet. It's a really cool ability. It's a really cool mix of 2 abilities together and seeing how they work well together. So Station can be really powerful, and it's extra powerful when you mix it with Warped, like I said. And finally, it's not really an ability, but it's a new token that we are getting that isn't too bad itself, and it is called Landers. So what does a Lander do? Basically, it is an artifact token that comes onto the field, and you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to go and search for a basic land out of your library and put it onto the battlefield tapped. That's it. But it's going to be really powerful because for 2 you can get a basic land and get some ramp. And with it being an artifact, you'll see there's some decks that are really going to like this sort of ability. Next up, we're going to dive into the cards and the different styles that I really talked about. Today, I have 4 different stylish decks. First up, we have Zu Effete, Asterio Harmonist. And this card's really good in our Sac deck, because we're going to talk about our Sac cards first. Cards that work really well in a sacrifice deck, right? And this card's really good because it can just basically get a target creature card out of your graveyard onto the battlefield. And yes, it loses its abilities, but it becomes maybe another thing that you can use to sacrifice. Or maybe it's big enough that you just swing in and you just get payoff just out of the sheer power and toughness of it. So next up we have Umbral Caller Zealot, and this is going to be the set's sacrifice outlet. And also I was told that it also is part of a 4-card infinite combo. Next up, the Lightless Evangel. And whenever you sacrifice another creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So if you look at it with the last guy that we had, this is just going to get huge. Then Susirian Voidborn. This is going to be our Aristocrats card that really kind of does a little extra work, a little extra damage for us in this style of deck. And just basically whenever another creature, or an artifact you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The cool thing is this also has warp. So if you have a big turn, but you just don't have enough mana to play this necessarily, or you need it to play something else, for a single black pip, you can cast this and still get payoff on it. Then Susirian Dirgecraft. This one is actually kind of interesting because it forces your opponents to sacrifice a non-token creature, which is a little bit stronger than just sacrificing a creature, I feel like. 9 times out of 10, if they have tokens, they have this. And here's an example of our station ability. So remember, like I said, you can tap a creature and it puts its charge counters equal to its power on this spacecraft. So if it was a 5, it would have 5 charge counters, and it would need 2 more to get to that 7+ that we see here. And then it would become a flying 4/3 artifact creature. And next up, this is a real big heater because it kind of gives you a little bit of recursion throughout the deck, and it has warp, so you can trigger this twice, is the Prerelease Beckoner. And when it enters, until the end of turn, a target creature you control gets +2/+0, which sure, fine. But also when it dies, you return it to the battlefield tapped. And like I said, you can warp this, so you get 2 triggers out of it. You can use your sack outlet to sacrifice that creature to get it back to the battlefield again. It's just, I think you're seeing what's going on. This is also, if you have 2 of these, this is part of that 4-card combo with the sack outlet and also the Aristocrats card that hits your opponent for 1. Finally, our last sack card that we have is Coral of the Void. And basically, you go ahead, you enchant your a creature you control, and then when it attacks, you put target creature from a defending player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, tapped and attacking. And then it has our Void ability here. So you'll see at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice this aura unless a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped this turn. I think you can see now how all of the cards that I kind of mentioned around the sacrifice deck really work together. So next up, we're going to dive into artifacts. And the first one that we have is Orb Plate Pangolian. And this is really cool because whenever an artifact comes into play, you can pay 1, and this gets a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So in an artifact deck, like we're talking about right now, and we're going to be talking about for a minute here, you're going to have a ton entering. You just pay an additional 1, this guy gets bigger, starts running over your opponent. Good card. Then Memnon Uthros Exile. So very simple, kind of similar to the last card. Whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Then next up we have Tezzeret, our only planeswalker within the set. And whenever an artifact we control enters the battlefield, we put a loyalty counter on Tezzeret. And he just really works well because you untap target artifact or creature, and if it was an artifact creature, thinking like a fully charged spacecraft, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, right? And then his negative ability allows us to go and search for an artifact card with mana value 1 or less, and then we put it into our hand. And then the very last thing, his -7, is we get an emblem that at the beginning of combat, on every turn, you put 3 +1/+1 counters on target artifact you control. And if it's not a creature, it becomes a 0/0 robot with 3 +1/+1 counters. So it's just building that army, it's creating more artifacts, it's doing more things with your artifacts, it's finding your artifacts, and it's just becoming part of an engine within this deck. Then we have the Pinnacle Emissary. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless drone with flying. You create 1 billion drones. Now, Cerebral Download, and this is interesting because it's Surveil X, and X is actually how many artifacts we control. And then you draw 3 cards. Then a favorite of the community, our little lobster citizen, Ragos, the Deft Gastronaut. Artifacts you control are food, in addition to their other types. And basically for food, you can pay to, tap it, sacrifice it, and you gain 3 life. But as an alternate cost, you could do pay 1, tap and sacrifice a food, and it deals 3 damage to each opponent you control. And then at the beginning of each end step, if you gain life this turn, you untap Ragos. So looking at the blue-red card that we just talked about, that creates drones for us. Those drones become easy fodder for Ragos to go and eat them, essentially, and then fling them at our opponent's face. Next up, Cryogen Relic. And this is just really basic, simple, just kind of reminds me of old school good commander card, right? So when it enters or leaves, you draw a card. So hand advantage right there. This is just one of those cards that's going to be good. You're just going to play it if you're leaning in blue at all. Then Sammy, the ship's engineer. So this is really cool because if you tap 2 or more creatures on your turn, you create a 2/2 colorless robot. So another way, create more artifacts, create an engine. Tapping creatures isn't hard because you tap them for your spaceship, you get more value. Then Mechan Assembler, another sweet card for when another artifact enters the battlefield, you create one of those 2/2 colorless robot tokens. Unfortunately, this only triggers once a turn. The second Sammy card, Wildcat Captain, so double strike vigilance, great, but spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. Make everything so much cheaper for me. I would love to cast things. So another card that a lot of people aren't reading, or it takes a couple times to read to get the whole thing, is Scour for Scrap, and you can choose one or both, and that is the thing people keep missing. So you can search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Just a artifact card. And then the second part of it is return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So if we're sacking things with, say, Ragos, goes to the graveyard, we can get it back. Then Nutrient Block. So this is one of our food items for the set. First off, it's indestructible, and then you can pay to tap, sacrifice it, and get 3 life. And then when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. So basically that ability could just say you gain 3 life and draw a card. It doesn't, because there's other things we can do with it. Once again, looking at you, Ragos. Galvanizing Saw Ship. So plain and simple, it's a 6 cost with Station 3, which is incredibly easy. Flying Haste 6/5. Virulent Silencer. So this is the one that I talked about with poison counters. Once again, it's in here because it's a good little artifact. And then whenever a non-token artifact creature deals combat damage to a player, that player gets poison counters. So next up we have Rust Harvester, and it's real cheap, and it has Menace, and it's a 1/1. But it also has 2 pay to tap, exile an artifact card from your graveyard, and you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So you put a counter on it, and you hit face. Now we have Warmaker Gunship, and just right off the bat, it enters, and it deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control to target creature and opponent controls. Just nice, easy, simple removal. I think that works great in the artifact deck. Cleftstalker Ardent. This is sweet because whenever a creature or artifact you control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent you control. And it also has Warp. So, like I said, if you have some way to get multiple artifacts in, or trigger multiple of like getting a 2/2 robot in, you warp this card for 2 less. It comes onto the battlefield for a turn. You get all that benefit, and then maybe next turn you hard cast it in. we are going to talk about the landfall deck that I kind of see cards working with. I like this card. This is Seed Ship Agrarian, and when it becomes tapped, it creates a lander token, which is sweet because the lander token is going to be fodder for our landfall effect. Boom, triggers landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Then we have Tanook Memorial Ensign, and very short, sweet, simple landfall of just, hey, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. But if it happens 2 times, you get to draw a card. If it happens more than that, it's still 1 damage. Then Glacier God Maw. This is going to be your big bruiser that you have in this deck, amongst others, because green do green. Landfall, whenever a land you control enters, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance and haste until the end of your turn. Buffs your whole team, and it gives them vigilance, and it gives them haste when 1 land enters. That's so good. That's so good. Then Genomorph Imago, and this guy just basically has like a March of the World Ooze toned down a bit on a landfall trigger. So when a land enters, target creature gets base power and toughness of 3/3, and then if you control 6 or more lands, it's 6/6 instead. Next up, Sammy's Curiosity, and it's just so cheap, just a forest. You gain 3 life and you create a lander token, which will trigger that landfall for us. Great card. Might Form Harmonizer, so this guy has landfall, and it's basically a Tifa. And it also has warp, so that's neat. Larval Scoutlander. This one's basically in here because as soon as it comes in, you sacrifice a land or a lander, and then you get 2 basic lands from your library onto the battlefield. Now, the card everybody's looking for in green is Icetill Explorer, so you get to play an additional land. You also get to play lands from your graveyard, and then it has a landfall trigger of being able to mill cards. Which, if you have a deck that has some sort of reanimation in it, I mean, this could be great. Because you don't care what goes into the yard, you're able to play it one way or another, right? Then you social engineering, landfall trigger, you get a 2/2 robot, and it also has warp. One of my favorite cards in the set, Famished Worldsire. And Ward 3, Devour Land 3, which means when it comes in, you sacrifice as many lands as you want. And it puts +1/+1 counters on Famished Worldsire equal to the amount of lands that you sacrificed times 3. So you sacrifice 3 lands, you get 9 counters on them. But then here's the big one for landfall. When this creature enters, look at the top X cards of your library where X is its power, and you put any number of lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then you shuffle your library. So you have the potential to get 5, 6, 7, I don't know, 8 landfall triggers, potentially. I understand this in the 8 cost, so it's going to be later in the game. You at least have 8 lands on the field, right? But so good. And in bigger formats like Commander, incredible value. So Terrapact Intimidator, and when it enters, your target opponent has a choice. You can have me create 2 lander tokens, or I'll put 2 +1/+1 tokens on this creature. And both of them are kind of bummers if you're the opponent. But so next up, we are going to dive into a little bit of a counters deck and see what that looks like, of just taking counters and dumping them on our creatures and making them big as frickin' heck. The first one that we have is such a sweet spicy card, Cosmogrand Zenith. And when you cast your second spell each turn, you get to choose one. Put 2 1/1 human soldiers on the battlefield, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, what I would say is, and it might be unpopular opinion, but if you have less than 4 creatures on the battlefield, go with the first one. Dawn Strike Vanguard. So this guy has lifelink, but at the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control other than this creature. Every creature on your board's getting +1/+1 counters if you got 2 or more tapped. Now, Sunstar Lightsmith, whenever you cast your second spell on your turn, this dude gets +1/+1 counter put on it, and you draw a card. So it's a way to get card advantage in your hand, and it's a way to get this guy bigger. Atmospheric Greenhouse. So when it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Then Drix Fate Maker. When this creature enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and then each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. This has warp, so you can put at least 2 on for the life of this card. Then Loading Zone. So if a counter were to be put on a creature, planet, spacecraft, you put twice that many. So the station ability, say you're tapping a 3 power creature to put 3 charge counters on some station card, that's going to be 6 now. This also has warp, so if you have an ability that really is going to trigger this multiple times, or trigger your counters multiple times, use this guy. Melt Strider Eulogist. If a creature with a +1/+1 counter dies, draw a card. Yeah. I think in this deck we're going to have that on every creature. Ouroboros. This one. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is this creature's power. That includes itself. And think about it, if you have Loading Zone out, you put twice its power's worth of counters on things. And finally, for our counter deck, we have Terra Symbiosis. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature, you may draw that many cards. So looking at Ouroboros, you put 4 counters on a creature, or on all your creatures, you're drawing 4 cards. Now this only triggers once each turn, so be very careful where you trigger this at. Now next up, we're just going to run through removal cards in the set. There's a lot of them that I think are really good, so let's hit it. Now All Fates Stalker, basically exile a creature card under this guy until it leaves the battlefield. Banishing Light, exile a non-land permanent under it till it leaves the battlefield. Beyond the Quiet, exile all creatures and spacecrafts. Super sweet card. This is an interesting one. Cryo Shatter. So enchant a creature and it gets -5, -0. And then also, if it becomes tapped or is dealt damage, you destroy it. There's plenty of little cards that just do slight little ping damage or pings any target. That's a great way to get this card off the field. Focus Fire is going to be that card that you want if you have a big board or you think you're building a big board, because it deals X damage, where X is basically the number of creatures you control or spacecrafts you control, and then +2. Radiant Strike, just a simple kind of like a Sephiroth's intervention, where depressurize. If it gives a creature -3 for its power, and if its power is less than 0, you destroy it. Embrace the Oblivion, so you sack an artifact or creature, destroy target creature or spacecraft. It's a 1 cost, that's why I think it's important to put it in here. Then Grav Kill, exile target creature or spacecraft. I think removing it and sending it to the abyss, really good trajectory. So at the base, gives a creature -2, -2, but Void can happen. So when you cast it, the creature gets -10, -10. If you had a non-land permanent leave the battlefield this turn, or if a spell was warped. 0 Point Ballad, this is a little mean one. So destroy all creatures with toughness X or less. You lose X life. Bummer. But if X is 6 or more, return a creature card put into a graveyard this way onto the battlefield under your control. Cut Propulsion, so you choose a target creature and it deals its power to itself, and if it has flying like a spacecraft, it deals twice that much damage instead. Good little way to deal with your opponent's creatures and not put yourself in danger. Invasive maneuvers. Deal 3 damage to target creature, and it deals 5 damage instead if you control a spacecraft. Close encounters. So you choose a creature you control or a warped creature you own in exile, and close encounter deals damage equal to the power of that creature to target creature. Orbital Plunge, really interesting card. Deals 6 damage to a target creature, and if you dealt excess damage, you create a lander token also. Siege Ship Impact, basically just a green little destroy artifact enchantment, and if the mana value was low, 2 or less, create a lander token. Now Dawn Sire is one of the cards that I kind of alluded to, where if you station it for 10, you get to attack, you deal 100 damage to one creature or planeswalker. So just completely blow it away. But if you get to 20, it gets that ability and it's a flying 20/20. Singularity Rupture. So destroy all creatures, then any number of target players, each mill half their library rounded down. Next up, our last little section that we're going to run through is just plain old good cards. We didn't really have a deck that they fit in. There might be some crossover where they could fit in a certain deck, but all in all, just sweet cards. Alright, so first up we have Moonlit Meditation, and basically the first time you would create tokens during your turn, you may create copies of whatever creature or artifact this is attached to. And that's sweet. Next up, Anti-Causal Vestige. So it has warp on it, which is neat, and it's a 7/5 at least. But when this creature leaves the battlefield, you draw a card, then you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So cool little way to cheat and free cast something in, and you get to do it twice. Nanoform Sentinel. So when this creature becomes tapped, you can untap another permanent. Exalted Sunborn. So Anointed Procession on a stick. Cool part, you have warp. So if you're going to create a bunch of tokens but you can't pay for this full cost, warp this in, create those tokens, get a bunch of value, hardcast it next turn. Then Starfield Vocalist. That's a Panharmonicon but better on a creature. Halia, this is really cool because it's like a, I don't know, a gaffer and something else. I forget the card, but whenever another creature or an artifact you control enters, you gain a life, and then if you've gained 3 or more life, draw a card. Also, warp. Then Starwinder, warp again, but whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw that many cards. That's so good. Honor doesn't seem like much, but it feels super powerful to me. Just for 1 cost, putting a +1/+1 counter on a creature and drawing a card. Weft Walking isn't necessarily potentially super strong for the second part, but it seems fun. So whenever it enters, if you cast it, you shuffle your hand and your graveyard into your library, you draw 7 new cards. Sweet. But then from there on out, while this is on the battlefield, each player for the first spell on each of their turns, they may cast it without paying the mana cost. So you cast something big and sweet. Seems goofy, but seems kind of fun. Pinnacle Star Cage. So if there's a bunch of things of mana cost 2 or less on the battlefield, cast this. Exile all those things under this. Obviously tokens disappear, so they don't count, but then you can pay 8 and you can create 2 2s equal to the amount of creatures that were exiled under this card. Build up your board super huge, super quick, super efficient. Arch Enemy Charm. So this is sweet because it has an exile on it. Awesome. Or you can return things from your graveyard to your hand. Sweet. Or you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature and for the turn give it lifelink. Card's going to be so good. Alpha Rael is just going to be a beater because in pre-release nobody's really going to want to discard a card to target something. And then also they kind of have to, or they gotta board wipe their own board, because the void cost when Alpha Rael attacks, if something left the battlefield or was warped this turn, defending player loses half their life rounded up. So you're just gonna keep chunking their life away and then deal 3 damage on top of that. Dubious Delicacy is just like a weird cool food thing. You can flash it in and target creature gets -3/-3, so like food poisoning a little bit. And then you can do the regular food thing and gain 3 life, or you can do the regular cost for food thing and target opponent loses 3 life. Super interesting. I wonder what the better end of it is when you're actually playing. I feel like I'm always going to hit my opponent. Codecracker Hound, so you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 in hand and the other into your hand. I mean graveyard. Sorry, the graveyard feels like your hand anymore, so I get it confused. And it has warp, so you put 4 cards into your hand. I mean 2 cards into your hand and 2 cards into your graveyard. Yeah. Sothera, so the big boy chase card of the set. Whenever a creature you control dies, your opponent chooses a creature they control and they exile it. And then at the beginning of your end step, if a player controls no creatures, you sacrifice Sothera, put a creature card that was exiled under this onto the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters. I know that there's a handful of people that feel kind of mid on this one, but I think it might be heat. I think it might be heat. It's definitely way better in like Commander, but like pre-release, yeah, sure, might as well play it. And it's only 4 cost. It's not like you're paying like 6, right? It's 4. Consult the star charts, I think is pretty interesting because you're looking at the top of your library and it's equal to the number of lands you control. Yeah, it's not even the one that's like differently named lands. And you put one of those cards into your hand, and then if it was kicked, you put 2 in your hand. And Pain for All. So this one is going to be fun if you manage to get it out there with Dawnsire with 10 counters on Dawnsire. Tanook, Steadfast Second. Basically, all your creatures have haste, and then artifact and red cards in your hand have warp 2 and a red. Frenzied Baloth, so little worse questing bees, but like still a pain. Now Cosmogoyf, this is a sweet card that you have to watch out for because its power and toughness is determined by how many cards the player has exiled. So this could very well be a win con if you're just exiling all the cards, and your warp cards count towards the exile also. So don't forget to add those in. Yeah, it'll close out games. It'll be huge and it'll smack and you won't even know what happened. Then another one of my favorites that I've seen, Space-Time Anomaly. Target player mills cards equal to your life total. And I mentioned this in the preview, but like during the pre-release, if you don't lose any life and your opponent doesn't draw any additional cards, on turn 4, you play this, your opponent goes down to 9 cards in library. And now I did watch the pre-release from Loading Ready Run, and Cam went down to 9 cards and still ended up winning the game. So like doing that doesn't mean that you're scot-free yet, but yeah, it does make it quite hard for your opponent to come back. Then Servandum, this was another one that I wasn't too sure about, but after seeing it played out, it's just so oppressive. Like when it enters or attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+0 and Death Touch. That second part, Death Touch, nobody wants to mess with you. Everybody just runs away. And the fact that this is a 4/4 from the get-go, with lifelink and death touch. So good. It's so good. Now I had to mention it just because, but the thrumming hive pool just seems insane, because at your upkeep you create 2 1/1 colorless slivers and they have double strike and haste. Now imagine this, if you were to somehow pull 2 of these, it has affinity for slivers, so if the one starts going off, you have potential to cast the next thrumming hive pool for cheaper or free. That's real good. And then you'd be creating 4 1/1 double strike haste slivers at the beginning at your upkeep. So that's it. We did it. We got through the whole amount of cards that I wanted to talk about. All of the different decks that I think are potential there. Then the cards that might actually turn those decks on. We talked about removal. There's a lot in this set, and all of the really good cards that I think, regardless of what deck you're running, there's potential to just put that card in the deck no matter what. So tell me what you think. Tell me if I got some right. Tell me if I got them wrong. I'm open to opinions. Make sure that if you aren't subscribed, you subscribe. Make sure if you liked the video, you liked it. If you didn't like it, don't worry about it. You don't have to do anything. That's okay. And, you know, hopefully we do well in the pre-release together. And until next time, let's get that W. Be kind. Peace, y'all.